Set sail for the Dreadshore. In preparation for the release of Dreadshore, the developers have released a major patch update, which features lots of balance changes, quality of life improvements, bug fixes, and more. Some of the highlights are outposts may now be activated on infinite number of times after reaching Prestige 10. Completing raids will now reward a guaranteed amount of synthite or parts, depending on the difficulty. Co-op partners will now both receive their ranking points as intended rather than just the host. That's a nice change. Raiders can no longer disconnect and force you to lose your progress on your base, so that means they can no longer cheat the system and get taken out, hard reset the system, and then have all those erased. Now every single takedown is going to be recorded. And last but not least, big nerfs for the Plasma Sentinel and the Corrosive Cubes. And we're going to get into that more in just a second. Now, the first one we're going to deep dive into is the rewards, because I feel like this is probably one of the best and biggest changes that they added. Now, every time you do a mission, it's going to show you what kind of reward, synthite or parts, and it'll give you a set amount for completing that mission, getting the genset, and coming back. Now, that is on top of any parts or synthite you collect from destroying traps, defeating guards, or, of course, finding the vaults, cracking those open, and getting those. It just, in my short time of playing after this update launched, I have seen a significant increase in how much synthite and parts I've been getting for missions. Whereas beforehand, I could go through a mission several times, walk out of that with maybe 60 synthite, maybe 40, 50 parts, and that fluctuated a lot. Now it's really nice because it feels a lot more guaranteed. You're guaranteed to get those parts or synthites. It is either or, except for on champion outposts. On this, it says or on the champion outpost, but when I've played, it was both. So you were getting 100 for synthite and parts for all the difficulties, which is a huge change because now I actually want to play those champion outposts. Whereas beforehand I was like, no, they're probably going to be way more difficult than they should be, and I'm not going to get enough rewards. Now it's actually starting to make those champion outposts a lot more worth it because you're getting the guaranteed 100 parts and synthite on top of everything else you get for playing those. Now, this does come with some rebalancing for how you earn parts throughout the game. Forsaken Tombs, I call them vaults. They're now only going to be dropping 5 loot drops, little loot cubes, instead of 8. So that's definitely appropriate change, considering that we're now getting that guaranteed reward at the end, and I'm willing to trade that out. The parts and synthite rewards have been removed from the daily reward, so that's pretty significant. That now means that beforehand, doing a couple missions, you got 250 synthite and parts alongside the cells. Now it's just the cells. That's pretty significant, but honestly rewards you for actually playing, because I'll admit, like, I was just collecting a lot of parts and synthite by just letting my my base fill up with Gen Met and rewarding me with those. So that's fine. That's a fine change. Both of those are nice changes. They feel necessary to make the game more rewarding for playing it, not just not playing it, I guess. Further rebalancing to loot, the Spoils of War and the Strip Mine buffs that your advisors can give you, the parts booster and the synthite booster, they have both been nerfed significantly because you're now getting a lot more guaranteed parts and synthite. And knee-jerk reaction is this was pretty hefty, less of a reason to use the boosts. And to be completely honest, I'm not too sure. It's still pretty early in it. I feel like it's a gradual, there's already such a big shift from getting synthite and parts every time you finish a mission. I'm not quite seeing the difference yet because I can't compare it. I can't compare where, as before, I might be able to compare using the boosts. when it was on a purely randomized system. Now it's not so easy because you're just getting significantly more than you usually are. So the buff doesn't seem to be too bad. I mean the nerf to the buffs doesn't seem to be too bad, but we'll have to kind of wait and see how it does in the long term. This was probably just damage control to make sure the values don't get out of control. If the buff just isn't worth it, if paying 200 parts for the max buff isn't worth it, then I'm sure we'll see buffs. But I'd say probably be a bit more sparing unless you're really planning on focusing on farming for parts or synthite. Then go ahead and shell out what you need to get the buff. But until then, just kind of keep an eye on it, I'd advise. And now onto the trap balancing. Now this is pretty big because it's all nerfs onto some of the most common traps that we see. The biggest one, I'm just going to jump on it, the Plasma Sentinel's capacity cost has been increased from 50 to 70. And its traps, Eagle Eye and Plasma Cloud, have also been increased, as well as Self Destruct. All of those are pretty pain in the butt mods. And honestly, I'm going to be, I love the Plasma Sentinel. I think it's a really cool trap. It's super cool that it's got kind of like a 360-degree capacity. That's something that no other trap really has. You take this cube, you stick it in the middle of your base, it can see everywhere. It's a really cool trap. But the way it's been used a lot lately, it's just kind of been spammed, just making a wall of projectiles that all leave a plasma cloud. That it's just kind of a pain. You know what I mean? Like, I'm all for making challenging paces, but I'm more of like, let's make them fun, shall we? So I think this is nice because it's pushing the Plasma Sentinel to be more of a once, twice, three times in your base. Because its capacity now, whereas before it costed maybe about 80 to put a fully decked out Plasma Sentinel in your base, now it's going to cost you over 100. That's going to be pretty significant. That means that every prestige, you're only going to be able to add maybe two of these if that's all you want to add. So I'm expecting we're going to see a lot less spamming. The corrosive cubes got the same treatment, went from 15 to 20. Not as significant as the Plasma Sentinel, but significant nonetheless. We might not see a huge decrease in corrosive cubes, but the builders are definitely going to have to make a conscious decision on whether they want more traps or more cubes. And I feel like they're going to choose more traps over the cubes. Hopefully. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what they make. It's nice. It's a nice thing to see because I feel like plasma cubes have a niche that they can do that's really interesting. I've seen some really cool designs with it that doesn't involve spamming them everywhere and more of just using them to guide the player's path. Or my personal favorite use of the corrosive cube, making shortcuts. Not enough people make shortcuts in their base. Plasma cube's a great way to do that because one, it rewards players being a little bit, brave, a little bit risky, and it rewards players paying attention to detail. So you can make this big labyrinth that they can get lost in, but if they pay attention, maybe the plasma cubes all link to somewhere else. Maybe you could fall through the plasma cubes and get somewhere. Maybe there's a plasma cube that takes you directly outside of the base after you grab the gen sect. And I think that's all really cool level design, I hope to see more of. And, it's not going to stop the kind of corrosive cube spam, but maybe it'll make people more intentional with what they do. Last thing we're going to touch on in this video, because this has actually been running quite a while. I appreciate all you sticking around for my thoughts and opinions on these patch notes. And that's weapon balancing. Now, the arc barrier's perfect block window has been reduced by 0.5 seconds on each level. The new perfect block windows is 0.25, 0.35, and 0.5. So definitely going to have to upgrade that if you want to get more out of it. I actually haven't used the arc barrier at all, but this is definitely going to affect some of the players who use the arc barrier a lot. Hope it's not too hard on them. I hope they can adjust. I know there's a couple people who play it in my levels, and I'm always like, man, that's cool. That takes a lot of skill. Looks like they're really narrowing down how much skill it takes. So I hope I hope it's not too rough on them. Big change, though, hardware balancing. The Phoenix Pod can now be used twice per raid. The Phoenix Pod is now automatically unlocked for all players, so all new players are going to get it. They don't have to spend points to get it. And the players will start for 25 in your inventory. Players will now also start with 25 grenades in their inventory. So that's huge because now players can kind of immediately get the hardware in their inventory. It's now right off the get-go. And Phoenix Pods, let's talk about this twice per raid. Now, this just seems like it's absolutely as intended because beforehand, you only had one use, right? So you start off, you throw out your Phoenix Pod, you run through the base, you get through it flawlessly. You said, hey, I did a really good job. You trap the gen mat, and then you step on a spike. Boom. Where's my Phoenix Pod? It's destroyed. It destroys when you grab the gen mat. Why? Because they don't want people getting out of the base. Easy peasy. Throw it on the teleporter. Boom, you're out of the base. They don't want that, obviously. But because you could only use it once, because you could only carry one, you throw it out, and then there's no use to using it when you first go through a mission, right? Basically, the functionality of the Phoenix Pod was to get all the way through the mission, grab the gen mat, then toss it down, so that on your way out, you have a second chance. Now you can carry two into a mission, which is huge, and honestly feels like that's its intended purpose. Now you can use one at the beginning of the mission before you grab the gen mat, and you can use one at the midpoint of the mission after you grab the gen mat. Because everybody knows once you grab the gen mat, the level changes dramatically. There's almost no levels that don't. Some don't, in which case, save your Phoenix Pods. But the levels that do, you can now get to the gen mat and from the gen mat using your Phoenix Pod, which is honestly just a phenomenal change because it feels like that's what Phoenix Pods were intended for. Yep. Also, just touching on the fact new players are now going to have access to them, which I think is great. I don't know how often Phoenix Pods were used or not. I think they're a fun little tool used to kind of bypass defenses just by running through, triggering every single trap in a hallway, getting nicked on the last one, and then being like, sweet, like now I can just walk out of here. The builder still gets points for his trap getting you, and you get the gen mat because you were smart enough to keep the Phoenix Pod. So I think it's a good change. I think it's good for new players getting a hold of it. And yeah, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for those who stuck around and listened to all my opinions on these patch notes. Getting really close to Sector 1, Dreadshore. I'm really excited for it. It's going to add a lot to the game. There's still the ranking system, but then also the new weapon, which is going to really change up the meta, being able to shoot grenades pretty much. New suit, new traps, so much good, tasty stuff that I can't wait to sink my teeth into. But maybe when it releases, you can expect another little content from me. Who knows? Maybe I'll be too busy playing. But I hope you have a good time. Hope you have fun making some new bases. And I hope you enjoy Sector 1 when it releases. Until then, take care, Custodian.